therapy good for PDA kids? This is a question I get a lot, and I want to talk to you guys a little bit about my trip with my son and explain to you how I think about therapy and how I coach families through that exact question. And like always, it is a nuanced answer. Okay, so the question we're talking about today is therapy good for PDA kids and teens? Hi, everybody. So happy to be back. So my son and I just got back a week ago from 7 days in Colorado with an occupational therapist. Hi, everybody. And in my opinion, shaman and healer. So this is someone that I had worked with virtually to do the Safe and Sound protocol for myself, to work on my own nervous system regulation. And the Safe and Sound protocol is based on polyvagal theory. It's a listening therapy that you do for 5 consecutive days, and it stimulates the inner ear and opens up the vagal pathway. So I wanted to try it out on myself first, and it was very amazing, everybody, for me. And I had done the Safe and Sound protocol with my son before I was even steeped in PDA when he was 5. And I did it twice because I knew that he had a trauma response, but I didn't know why. And it was very important in our journey in the sense that for a period of time, I could see the child behind the threat response, because it was very, very hard for me to see anything but fight flight when he was younger. But the effects wore off. So today I want to talk to you guys about this bigger picture question before we jump into your questions for Coffee with Casey about therapy. Okay, and I've written down some thoughts. So the first thing I want to say is that I always want to caveat and sometimes hesitate to share anecdotes about the specific modalities or specifics of the therapy that I've done with my son. Why is that the case? Because, of course, as parents, you're looking for solutions, right? And you're like, give me whatever she's doing. She seems to be okay. Her kid's in school. She has a business. She seems relatively happy. I'm just going to do what she's doing, right? And that's how I would have been 5 years ago, just looking for, what is the answer? And I want to say that while we can learn a lot from other people, my role here is to give you clarity on your particular child and help you make decisions and apply accommodations within the context of your family, given where you are in your journey, okay? So the Safe and Sound protocol has worked very well for some families, and I've worked with other families with PDA children for whom the Safe and Sound protocol actually was too activating for them, or the pressure put on the PDA child in order to engage with the therapy actually activated the nervous system, okay? Additionally, if you are neurodivergent, applying the Safe and Sound protocol to sort of open up that vagal pathway can be overstimulating and too much if applied over the course of the hour of listening. So I just need to say those caveats because I'm never going to recommend a therapy or a modality here on this platform. I don't do affiliations. I'm happy to make referrals if I know the people and know it's a good fit. But my goal is to get you clarity on your path and what works for you. Okay, so no blanket response. Okay, so what can we learn about this bigger picture question of, is therapy good for the PDA child or teen? Sorry, I just dropped that thing. So the first thing I want to say is, as a parent, you want to think about it sequentially, okay? So it's not a binary question of therapy's good, therapy's bad. What we want to think about is, where in your journey are you with your PDA child or teen? Hi, everybody. Are they in burnout? If that's the case, therapy is probably something we want to pull back on, because you're in a period of relearning your child, rebuilding trust, and learning to accommodate your specific child, which is something you're going to have to model and teach others in your life, including therapists, in order to do it in a way that's PDA friendly. So we don't want to jump right into therapy. That doesn't mean 2 years down the line, it's not going to be helpful for your child to do speech language pathology or occupational therapy or whatever, right? And of course, look at the data in your home. If your child loves doing a therapy, like, then you can infer from that data empirically, we can keep doing this, right? So I want to say that about the sequential element, because there is no way on God's green earth I could have taken my son to a different state, just the two of us with his service dog, and had him engage with an hour-long listening therapy 5 days in a row with a therapist, even 2 years ago. Okay, so I'm like more than 4 years in to this. Yeah. Okay, so the second is we want to think about a cost-benefit analysis when we're thinking about therapy, right? We want to pan back before we're even talking about modalities of like, I observe my child really likes the sensory play at occupational therapy once he or she or they get there. However, putting the demand and pressuring them to have the perceived loss of autonomy to get to therapy activates them and actually like ruptures some of the trust that we're building. Okay, so only you can make that decision, and it's a question that's specific to your child of like, is the benefit of getting this sensory regulation during the therapy worth the cost of pushing them to go to the therapy, which activates the nervous system because of the perceived loss of autonomy and equality to you and possibly the therapist. Okay, so that's the question you want to be asking. The third thing I want to say about therapy, and I'll give you a little anecdote to illustrate this, is the modality matters less than the person and energy behind the session. Okay, so for example, one of the most therapeutic things my son did during this Colorado trip, twofold. One was simply that we spent time together in a connected way, and I provided undivided attention for 7 days. Okay, so like we went into it, my husband and I, of like, you know, if the therapy, you know, we paid the certain amount to do this therapy, I trust the therapist, but if it's not going well, we just duck and roll off the track, and like we just have a good time together. And the therapy is the attuned co-regulation and me providing accommodations from a safe nervous system. Okay, so the therapy my son and I were doing was for our connection together. So if at any point I was observing, pushing him to do X, Y, or Z is coming in the way of the connection, we drop it. Additionally, one of the things that emerged organically was an interest for him in rock climbing, which I went with him with the service dog to do. One of the therapists, or he wasn't actually technically a therapist, formed a bond with my son energetically and in terms of nervous system safety while he was riding horses. So this beautiful shaman, other OT, was prompted the idea of like, what if you hired him to go rock climbing with your son because he is an expert in rock climbing? Rock climbing is not a therapy, right? But what was so therapeutic that he had this person who just, by the way that they existed and interacted with him, no pressure, totally saw him as competent, wasn't upset by dysregulation, and one of the conversations I had on the phone with him when we were deciding if we were going to do this, I was like, he wants to rock climb. He doesn't want you to teach him. Like, don't teach him, right? And so this person had that ability to just like strew prompts when it was necessary and encourage him in a really intuitive way. Okay, so what was therapeutic about that, in addition to the movement, was the person. Okay, so this is really important to understand, because often we're thinking about modality, and honestly, like if you have an art therapist who is allowing for autonomy, not activated by equalizing behavior, allows the child, strews things and sort of co-regulates the child through it, they're going to move into their frontal lobe instead of being in their survival brain. And guess what? They're going to access more rational thought skills and potentially more speaking, right? And connection. that might be more therapeutic for your child's speech than a speech language pathologist who is focusing on skills over nervous system safety. And what often happens in therapeutic contexts, especially things like parent-child interaction therapy or other therapies that are establishing trust and connection, and it goes really well until they're like, okay, we established it, now we're doing skills. And then things go off the rails, because what's therapeutic? The connection and implicit trust and nervous system safety, not necessarily the modality. Of course, the ideal is that we have a beautiful speech language pathologist who also does the nervous system safety and accommodations, and then you have the unicorn that we all know and love. And they are out there. Okay, so fifth, and this gets back to the sequential point I was making of like, a lot of parents have to drop therapy for a year while they're getting their child out of burnout. And it can be very nerve-wracking because, of course, your child's at, quote, their worst moment. And it seems like they've regressed and lost all these skills. And it's when you want to go hardest into therapy because all you're seeing is what's coming from the survival part of the brain, right? And so you can't see the skills that they can access because they can't access them, and they can't learn new skills because they're not in that part of the brain. Okay, so often we have to take a step back, reestablish trust, get their cumulative nervous system activation down, and then re-explore therapy through collaboration, connection, and consent. Okay, so like, I never would have taken my son to Colorado to do the Safe and Sound protocol, everybody, if he had not said, yeah, I want to do that, right? And his caveat was like, yeah, I want to do that, but we have to bring the service dog. And I was like, let's do it, right? And I honestly had no idea how it was going to go. So we want to think about that because it's going to be much more therapeutic if you wait until you have that buy-in, consent, you connect over it of like, yeah, I think this might help you, and then they get to decide, like you strew it. And then finally, we have to adapt whatever modality it is to the PDA lens, right? So let me give you 2 examples. With the Safe and Sound protocol, the first 2 times I did it according to like the strict protocol of like, you can't increase the child's heart rate, right? You don't want them to be aroused, so not a lot of movement. I mean, think about how hard that is for a PDA child, especially in externalized expression, who's 5, right? All my son wanted to do was move. And so I'm trying to like not get him activated by not having him move, except my attempt to, corral what he's doing with his body is activating him, right? Like nervous system activation, nervous system activation. Second, there's not supposed to be any talking, which for him, he didn't seem to mind when he was 5 because he didn't talk a lot. But like, again, if you're like trying to not talk and they're wanting to talk, nervous system activation. And then finally, not allowed to eat because it interferes with like how your ear can perceive the music. But for many PDA children, especially when they're like 5 or close to burnout, oral regulation is a primary tool with like crunchy snacks in order to engage with something, right? And so this was over 3 years ago, but what was different about this time with the occupational therapist and healer in Colorado was we had movement, we went on the swings, we went into nature, we fed the chickens, we did all sorts of stuff together. Second, we ate popsicles, we ate popcorn, we ate peaches. He didn't, I did. And we talked, right? It wasn't a lot of talking, but it wasn't like we were trying to stop the talking, which would have activated the nervous system. So another modality that I've done with him, again, a long time ago, was neurofeedback. And that had to be adapted as well, which was like, we did it in home because he couldn't go to a clinic. there were supposed to be half-an-hour sessions, but I negotiated a deal with the doctor for like, can we buy a month subscription and pay for that instead of by session, so that if he only does a minute, it's fine, right? Like if he does 2 minutes in one day, it's fine. And of course I allowed eating, and it was implemented through a screen where he had control over what he was watching. Okay, so we always have to be thinking through the PDA lens to even make modalities supportive of our children, and thinking through all of these nuances. Finally, I just want to emphasize every kid is different. Okay, so sometimes I get emails or texts or DMs, not texts, nobody has my phone number, about like, you always talk about how your kid's in school. And some of us, our kids can't go to school. And like, I completely understand that. My child could not go to school for 1.5 years. B, my goal, again, is to get you clarity. And there's a couple things going on, like patterns I've noticed, like PDA kids who are extroverted, who get dopamine from being with other kids and individuals, who actually have a special interest of social engagement with children, or maybe fixate on other children, often need to be outside of the home in order to be regulated in a school environment once they're out of burnout. I'm not going to say the same thing to a family in burnout or who has an introverted and internalized expression of a kid who has no interest in other children, right? Like those two trajectories are going to look very, very different. And we can't always predict it, and that's why we have to use the tools, accommodations, reframes that are provided here and apply them to your own home using your intuition, right? So like my example of my life is just one of hundreds of examples. Yes, you probably see mine more frequently, but that's why I also put up in the stories the community responses, so you guys can see the variability and the differences in the way that people find peace. Okay, so that was my little spiel about therapy, and now I'm going to go to your questions. And it's very good to see you guys. Okay, let's see. Still feeling like a servant, doing nearly everything for my son. I remember that period of years. There's still a degree of that, accommodating, but less than it used to be. I can't get my son to therapy without him shredding me to pieces. Okay, so this is a great example. Well, A, I'm sorry, the real Karen. B, because I know that's devastating for you, and like, you're probably in a place where it's like he's having such a hard time that it feels like the moment in his life when you most need to do therapy, right? And one of the reframes or decision-making tools we can use is to look at this objectively, knowing how the PDA brain works, and understand that the shredding you to pieces is an indicator of nervous system activation. And so then we want to think about the benefit, the true benefit of therapy, which for PDA kids, we want to think about access to basic needs. Like, is it improving sleep? Is it improving their ability to eat? Is it improving safety, hygiene, toileting independently? B, the connection to you, right? And trust. And 3, overall nervous system activation, which is an indicator of cumulative stress, okay? So when we have that full-on fight, we're seeing that indicator is worrisome, right? And sometimes we have to trade off in the short to medium term the social skills, the gross motor skills, the language processing, in order to get to a place where they're in the right part of the brain to access whatever therapy it is. So we have to discern as parents, is the true benefit of therapy right now worth the cost to you and the nervous system of your son? And that is a decision within constraints that are not fair and that suck as a parent, but only you can make that decision. You do have agency within those constraints. And I know there are lots of other things at play, like social pressure and, you know, pediatricians judging you and being like they need to be in therapy and all the things, but this is when we have to ground down into like what we know to be true, the data right in front of us, and our intuition as parents to make aligned decisions for our family. Yeah, so person is more important. Amy is emphasizing that. Yeah, the person and their energy and their nervous system regulation who's applying the therapy is much more important than the modality itself. And you will see this borne out again and again. Thanks for clarifying that the person is more important than the modality. My son likes therapy. Yeah, and like, for example, I have a client who like, they have a unicorn physical therapist, right? Who like the child loves and feels safe with. And it's like probably helping all different things about like social skills and, you know, sensory integration and trust and all these other things. Whereas like the physical therapist might be working on like, you know, ankle strength. So we just need to be thinking about like what's actually therapeutic. Yeah. Hi, Mom. Interesting about having another person take over a situation, getting you out of the middle. Yeah. All right. It can be so hard to find the activities they connect with. Just takes so much time. It does. And like, I will also say that for the first 2 or 3 years of my son's like post-realization of PDA and me working through this accommodation framework, like he didn't really have special interests that I could leverage in the way that I do now with like fishing and football. Like they were so short and so based on novelty, and he would drop them that I couldn't really gain any leverage. But like hopefully as your child's cumulative nervous system comes down, you will start to see more of those special interests, which is like where you can gain traction with engagement and incorporate it into therapy. Okay. These are great questions. Thanks, Donna. My suspected PDA child is 100% dependent on me for regulation. Yeah. Can you talk about tools to support your kiddo in feeling safe while primary parent gets some respite? Yeah, so that's a complex question, and I like absolutely know that feeling in my body because like for years I was the primary, and like especially when my son was in burnout, it was like harrowing for me because, and I know for you guys too, of like if I tried to go to the bathroom, my son would try and break the door down, or if I like tried to divert my attention to like cook a meal during the pandemic, he would start breaking things, screaming, or equalizing against his brother if I wasn't providing undivided attention, or like even sitting on the couch next to him while on a screen, if my my line of vision wasn't on the same thing he was looking at, he would start to become dysregulated. So I couldn't even like respond to a text, right? So I get this deeply. I think one thing to understand is if your child is in burnout and you're just learning about PDA, there will be a season as a parent where this is true, right? And it's really hard. But it doesn't mean it's going to last forever. And what you're doing, like if you can find meaning in it, like I found meaning in learning to be non-reactive and thought to myself, like I might be saving my child's life by providing this level of co-regulation because it's what his nervous system needs. And I had to like ascribe meaning to it in order to get through it, or else it just felt like I was a victim of circumstance, right? But practically, I think what we want to think about is finding, so it's not about a tool, it's about the person, right? Like finding a person where they feel implicitly and subconsciously safe. Okay, so let's say you have a co-parent. If they don't feel safe with that co-parent, and there's always a safest of the safe. So even in my home now, like currently, my husband is the safest of the safe. And in homes where both parents are totally accommodating and trying to connect and co-regulating, there will be a safest of the safe. So it's not something to take personally. It doesn't necessarily indicate that like the dad or non-lead parent or the non-preferred parent is doing something wrong. It's just a pattern. Okay, so, but what we want to do is to be able to establish that connection and trust with someone who is implicitly safe. And this might look very out of the box, right? So like, for example, one thing we did was to find like 2 14-year-old boys who were totally all about, totally all about autonomy and equality and doing their own thing and dopamine and going to look for crayfish and stuff, and hired them to be in the home while we were in the home to provide play and engagement, but my son could like come back towards me to get co-regulation. So it might start like on that level, and like I'm working with a client now where like the dad, they're practicing with the dad playing and applying the accommodations while the mom is in the room but scrolling, right? So she's getting to scrollax. She's not even in the shower because we're doing it incrementally. So we need to think of this as a season. We want to think of it as having a meaning and a purpose, right? Like this is you getting your child's nervous system to a place where they can access the exposure to more people and tolerate some of that. And it will happen, right? This is not for naught. It's not going to be like this forever. And think about creative and out of the box ways we can locate and identify people who could provide even an hour of respite, even if we're in the same home, right? And like temporarily or for the season that you're in, like showering with the door open, right? When I used to go to the bathroom, shower, or, try and be in my bed writing something, I would just have the door open because the door closed would be a source of fixation for my son to like break down the door and get to me. Okay. And then finally, I think, and I'll do a post about this. One of the things I talked about with this mom that I'm working with now was finding ways to like settle your nervous system in the moment in a way that your child won't notice. Because I know that like if you're doing like havening or deep breathing, they're like, stop doing that, right? So some of the things we talked about were like putting your eyes up. So often when we go into fight or flight, we get like tunnel vision. So putting your eyes up and just moving your eyes from right to left, which can get you out of that tunnel vision. So even better if you can like do what I'm doing now, which is looking at leaves rustling outside my window. I like to have a mantra of like, this too, this belongs in my human experience. This belongs like inside my head. Additionally, I use a drishti from yoga, which is like when you're in discomfort. Okay, I'm going to have to go in just a second. When you're in discomfort, like in a pose, and if you don't do yoga, this might not resonate, but like think about if you've ever done a sport, like when you're in the discomfort of holding a pose and your body wants to get out of it and every part of you is screaming, what can actually sustain the pose, and here the pose is like being with your child, is to relax into the discomfort and to do so by focusing on one single visual point, right? And so I often do this with my children of just like when I'm feeling the discomfort, I will focus on like my son's long eyelashes or the freckles on his nose or like where his jawline starts, and just really like use part of him as a drishti to stay super present with my own nervous system activation, right? And so these are like in the moment practices. I think there are things that are really hard to access during this season of your life that can help, like meditation and mantras and havening and stuff like that. But I remember probably about 2 years where like I could not do anything. Like I couldn't meditate, I couldn't do yoga, I couldn't do walks with friends. So it was really finding those small tools to sustain myself through that period of time, which hopefully mother to mother, me saying it's not going to be forever will help sustain you during this difficult period. Okay, let's do one more question and then I'm going to jump off. Okay, I already answered one from Karen. So I'm going to see. This session has provided me with so many aha moments. You're so welcome. Thank you, Carrie. My name's Casey. It's okay. For all you're doing as pioneers in this parenthood. Oh, I'm so happy it's helpful. Yes, we've been slowly doing this with a caregiver. He will be with her now while I'm doing something else for an hour or so if I'm available. Awesome. Yep, no closed doors, of course. Tapping method with reassuring messages are easy and super helpful. Yeah, tapping, isn't that the emotional freedom technique? I've done tapping. It wasn't the best modality for me. I think that's a great one, but probably not to do while you're interacting with your PDA child if they're in that like super controlling, like if they're like, stop doing that or stop talking or, don't look away, like that can be difficult to apply. 6 years deep of us not being able to do anything. Thank you for seeing us in that. Of course. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. I'm so happy to be here with you guys. Okay. My little buzzer went off, so I'm going to get back to my schedule, but it was so great to see you guys here on Coffee with Casey. I will be back here in a week, and I'll throw this up in the tiles so you can rewatch if it's helpful. All right, everybody. Have a good Tuesday. Bye.